that until the end, and then I'll go through and answer questions then. So let's get going. Who here has heard of this guy? I'm sure everyone, but I thought this was an interesting quote from him. Steve gets quoted with this a lot. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits. And he kind of creates this allure, I think, or this notion of entrepreneurs are these crazy individuals going off doing these risky, crazy things. And I want to present the counter argument, which is that entrepreneurship is actually the safest, sanest career choice for the 21st century. So this presentation, I'm going to talk about how living in Vietnam, some of the things I've done over the past few years have taught me that jobs, the way we traditionally understand them, are becoming more competitive and less profitable, why entrepreneurship is the safest, sanest career path in the 21st century, and a framework called the Stair step framework you can use to increase your chances of entrepreneurial success. So this is a picture of me. This is taken not too long after I graduated from college. Everyone in this photo, with the exception of myself at this time, had a quote-unquote good job. They were in advertising, finance, medicine, accounting, things that your parents would be happy if you went home and told them you were doing with your life. And this is a picture taken more recently, about a year and a half ago, at a conference in Bangkok, Thailand. It was an entrepreneurs conference. There were about 250 people there. And everyone was running their own business or working in some sort of internet business. And had kind of been able to fly over to Thailand and take a week to go to this conference. And we were sitting, it's actually the day after this picture was taken, at the breakfast buffet, talking about, what's going on. So like one of these guys runs an information publishing business. One of these guys has a podcast on cognitive enhancement, actually called Smart Drug Smarts, which if you're into that stuff, it's great. One has a software application. I was trying to think, how do I articulate this, what's going on here, to, my friends in what I would call like more traditional career tracks. And that was very much, the only world I knew growing up. And so that was kind of the genesis of the book. And so let me fill in the gap between what happened for me kind of in the 5 years between the time those two pictures were taken. A big thing that happened was I went to work with two entrepreneurs. This is taken at a trade show in Orlando, Florida. This was one of our product lines. We sold portable bars, valet parking equipment, and cat furniture. And you can see I was too cheap to buy dress shoes, so I'm wearing my sneakers at the business conference, which didn't go over too well, but the conference worked out anyway. And so over the course of about 2 years, we were able to grow their businesses very quickly. This particular business grew by about 500%. The overall portfolio grew between 30 and 50% year over year. And I was kind of, going through this and watching this business grow very quickly. And I was contrasting it, looking back at people who were, with advanced degrees, having trouble getting jobs. People I knew that were smart, that were hardworking people, that, were very grateful to get cost of living raises when they could. And there's just big gap. And it wasn't that this company was an anomaly or unique or special in that sense. I talked with hundreds, if not thousands, of entrepreneurs all over the world. They were kind of seeing the same thing, that they had more freedom and meaning in their work, and they were also making more money. And so why is this happening? I'll say the answer is leverage. And this is kind of the metaphor I want everyone to keep in their mind, just the metaphor I use in the book, that typically when something is difficult, our first reaction is to try and push harder. And what I want to encourage is, how can we instead get leverage? Instead of trying to pick up the massive rock, why not just set up a fulcrum and a lever and move it that way instead? So the first thing I talk about is this notion of the commoditization of credentialism, that if you look at kind of what happened post-World War II up until 2000, which is, the world very we were raised in, our parents were raised in for the most part, jobs were growing 1.7 times faster than population. This was a study put out by Kleiner, Perkins, Caulfield, and Byers, which is to say that there were more and more people, but there were more and more jobs, and that trend has reversed pretty starkly since 2000. The population is now growing 2.4 times faster than jobs. And kind of the popular narrative, or the common narrative you hear about this, is that this is a global economic recession, and if you just hold on, that will bounce back. And I don't think that's the case. And so why? So let's make this practical. This is Megan Parker. She was featured in a New York Times story a couple of years ago. She is a receptionist at a law firm in Atlanta. She earns $37,000 per year, and she has $100,000 in student debt. And this was, it took her months. She was working retail, churning out job applications before she could get this job. And this isn't kind of the notion we have in our head of, someone with a higher education and advanced degree, that they're churning out job applications to be able to get a receptionist position. That's not kind of the implicit promise. So what's happened with traditional education, with traditional credentials, with the traditional kind of knowledge economy way of doing things? Well, one is that degrees have gotten a lot more expensive. That since 1980, 1,100% increase in the cost of college degrees. For as much as something like medical care in the U.S. has increased, it's only increased half as much as college has. And the other thing is, it's questionable how valuable these are. This was a report Goldman Sachs put out, which is a very traditional company, that while a degree, used to guarantee a good job and long-term earnings, that's not the case anymore. And so why is this? What's changed? What's going on? One is globalization. So I think when people think about the developing world, that maybe an image like this is what comes to mind. This is Bintan Market. It's a market in the middle of downtown Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. And this is I think a recent picture a couple of years ago, and this is what it looks like. What people don't realize is this is a co-working space a few blocks away, and this looks a lot like a co-working space or an office in the U.S. And that what happened was large multinational companies, international organizations came in 20 or 30 years ago and funded education that has put people, literally, I was at a university event in Vietnam talking with people whose grandparents grew up in rice paddies. They were working in the rice fields, and they were JavaScript programmers and had advanced degrees. And that's happened very, very quickly. I saw this stat that if you look at the number of college graduates from 14 billion years ago, the Big Bang, the beginning of time, until 2000, there were 90 million college graduates. From 2000 to 2010, we added another 40 million. So it took all of human history to get to 90 million. And then in a brief 10-year span after that, that number increased by almost 50%. And these people are easily accessible, right? We have tools like Skype, voice over IP, Slack, all these chat messages. Like, it's easy. You can pretty much talk to anyone, anywhere in the world at any time for free now. And so people in these kind of traditional knowledge economy jobs that don't need a physical presence are all of a sudden not competing with people in their local area. They're competing globally with millions and millions of people who are very hungry, very motivated, in places with much lower cost of living. So we've got this kind of global pressure coming in on traditional careers, and we've also got technology. So this is Software is Eating the World was a quip by Mark Andreessen, who's the founder of Netscape. And it's kind of gotten popular. People like to say this Latin text circle, software is eating the world, software is eating the world. But what does that really mean to say software is eating the world? Well, one is just access to the internet. So 2004, there were 50 million internet users. By 2014, there were 2 billion, right? So 4,000% increase in a decade. All of a sudden, a huge number of people, this is what about a third of the world population, have access to the internet. The other is massive increases in efficiency, right? So Netflix and Blockbuster basically provide the same service, right? You want to watch movies in your house, they help you do that. The difference between the two is, well, one, Blockbuster went out of business, and the other is that what took Blockbuster 60,000 jobs to be able to provide, Netflix is doing with 2,000, right? 30 times fewer people to deliver what many would say is a better product. I think I like Netflix more than I ever liked Blockbuster. And this is happening in more than one industry, right? Kodak is gone, Flickr, Shutterfly, Instagram are now there. Amazon getting rid of retail, Craigslist getting rid of classifieds. Advertising dollars, right, are moving from newspapers and billboards and TV and radio to Facebook and Google. And with both these trends, particularly with technology, we have a real tendency to underestimate the speed at which things move. So this was, if anyone remembers these cell phones, there was a study commissioned in 1980 by AT&T. They hired McKinsey and Company, which is this very prestigious management consulting firm, for those that haven't heard of it. And they said, we want you to predict, this is 1980, we want you to predict how many cell phone users there will be in the year 2000. So they go out and they conduct this huge study, they gather lots of data, they present this very serious, data-driven report where they confidently predict there would be 900,000 cell phone users in 2000. And so that actual number was 100 million. So they were off by about 99 million, or a factor of 120, right? So, you got the group of the smartest people they could find, the smartest people they could hire to do this, and they were off by a massive, massive amount. That we are linear creatures very much living in an increasingly exponential world. So what does this mean? I want to come back to this idea of leverage, that what was scarce in the second half of the 20th century is no longer scarce, and that traditional career paths, traditional jobs are losing leverage. And this is a framework that really helped me understand this. It's called the Cynefin framework. It's Cynefin if you want to look it up. And it categorizes different types of work. So it starts in the bottom right, and then you kind of work your way counterclockwise around. And if what's happened is, in the last 300 or 400 years, work has been moving, or the kind of work demanded by the economy has been moving around this graph. So simple is going to be like agriculture and industrial work, right? So you are on a factory line, or you're on a farm, and they can pretty much tell you exactly what to do. That there's steps, there's an order of operations. It's A, B, C, D. It doesn't require a lot of creative thought. There's a best practice. Complicated is kind of this transition we made over the course of the 20th century, right? So you went from there's a best practice and exact way to do it to there are kind of fundamentals that you go to a university. The university and system is very much organized to teach people how to be successful in the complicated domain, that they're the basics of accounting or the basics of biology or whatever your field is. And you go in there and you learn 80% of what you need to know in university, and then they'll train you up. You have to do a little bit afterwards, but they kind of, you get the basis, and that's what you need. And I think what's happening now, what we're seeing is this transition from complicated to complex, which is there's no longer kind of clearly set best practices there. You see this word emergent, that the leverage is moving from complicated to complex work, which is very much the entrepreneurial domain. And I think this is actually a really, really good and a really, really exciting thing. And that if you think about it, all these factors we just discussed, globalization and technology in particular, which are making jobs more competitive and less profitable, are a boon to entrepreneurs, right? They're making entrepreneurship a longer lever, that suddenly you have access to a global workforce, you have access to technology that lets you distribute and scale very effectively and very cheaply. So let's kind of present a dichotomy, a story here to talk about this. So the sanity and safety of entrepreneurship. This is this building in the bottom is the Austin American-Statesman office. It is in Austin, Texas. The Austin American-Statesman is the local newspaper. You can see they've got quite a lot of office space. I think they have about 100 people on staff. You can see the delivery trucks to deliver the newspapers lined up in the back. It was started in 1876 to start a newspaper company in the 19th century. The startup cost, if you adjust for inflation, is usually around $1.5 or $2 million. That's probably how much it cost them to get the Statesman going. And they've got a subscription of about 180,000 customers that subscribe to their newspaper. So they started in 1872. It cost them a few $1 million. And they get about 180,000 people that they reach. This is a guy named James Clear. He's one of my favorite bloggers. He writes about willpower and motivation. He has no particular credentials to be able to do this. He played baseball in college, which got him interested, how do you become a high performer? How do you use habits and motivation to do that? And so he set up a website and he started writing about it. And as of February, he had 240,000 subscribers. So what took the Austin American-Statesman decades, if not a century, to do, what takes hundreds of people on staff to do, what takes delivery trucks and printing presses to do just 30 years ago, right? Like, this is all the internet, can now be done by one individual with an internet connection. And something else, and I think that something else is this complex entrepreneurial skill set. James couldn't go take a class in how to build a 200,000 subscriber blog. He had to figure out a way to get more leverage, and he was able to do that because of the tools we have available now. So this was very much complex work. It's a different type of work, and I think it's a more valuable and a higher leverage one. So kind of the question then is, okay, so let's say you accept this premise. How do you learn to operate in the complex domain to pursue your career entrepreneurially? So this is the Stair step method. It was presented to me by a guy named Rob Walling. He's in this picture here with his wife, Sherry. Rob is a very impressive guy, in my opinion. He runs a software company called Drip. It does marketing automation, email marketing automation. He has a book, Start Small, Stay Small, for developers that want to launch startups similar to his. You see someone like Rob, and you kind of say, oh, Rob probably popped out of the womb as an entrepreneur, and he was hawking lemonade at age 10. And turns out that's not the case. This was actually the subject of Rob's first business. It is a duck boat. For those of you that don't know what a duck boat is, it's what duck hunters take out and they hide under the camouflage to shoot the ducks. And he wrote a ebook on duck hunting, how to build your duck boat, right? So how to take the kind of stock factory flat bottom boat and convert it into a duck boat. And he sold that online. And that was his first business. It was very uncompetitive. As far as I know, he's still the greatest. He's the leading author of how to build duck boat ebooks, to my knowledge. And he started to get some kind of skills. He started to make some money. He started to learn how to do marketing on Google, which is how people were finding his book. And so he went on and started other businesses. He had a business that was selling wedding websites in the mid-2000s before they were kind of easy website builders for weddings. So couples would pay him to build their wedding websites. He had a job board for electricians. So for electricians that were trying to find jobs, he would charge them like a placement fee or an advertising fee to people coming on. Again, so these are not super competitive businesses. And then he started kind of moving into something a little more competitive. This is an invoicing software he ran for a while called .NET Invoice that does ASP.NET invoicing and billing. And then he moved on to an SEO tool called HitTail, which helped people that were trying to rank their sites in Google pick keywords that they could strategically rank for so more people could find their sites in Google. And looking back on this, he came up with this notion of the stair step, that you can stair step your way into entrepreneurship, and that starting with a simple product with a one-time price and one source of leads, while not as sexy, it lets you build momentum. And I think the real central insight to take away here is that entrepreneurship, just like running a marathon, is a skill set, and the one that starts, with the first step, with the first mile. And Rob wasn't the first person to think of this, that this notion that entrepreneurship is a skill set has been around for a long time. Peter Drucker, who was a very well-known management theorist in the 20th century, said entrepreneurship is a behavior rather than personality trait. Now maybe you're thinking, well, these are the positive stories. This is survivorship bias. What about this 9 out of 10 businesses that fail statistic? And I think 9 out of 10 fail is probably about right. The difference is we live in an age where 10% is more than good enough. One of the people I profile in the book wrote this article. His name's Dan Norris. He started 6 businesses in 12 months. 5 of them failed. The difference between doing that now and doing that 10 or 20 years ago, when you had to take out a mortgage on a building on Main Street, you had to do what the Austin American Statesman did. You had to invest all this capital. You can get to market really quickly and really cheaply. So in the period of a year, he launched 6 businesses, 5 failed. They were all very inexpensive failures, and the one that succeeded so much that it made up for all the failures and much, much more. So 9 out of 10 small businesses probably do fail, but it probably doesn't actually matter to the individual entrepreneur. And so I want to come to make it a wrap here and leave everyone with this quote, which has been on my mind for the last couple of weeks since I heard it. People get entrepreneurial block for only one reason. It is not because they are not passionate. It is not because they are not qualified. It is because they are afraid. You need to be clear with yourself about what you are afraid of, why you are afraid, and whether you care enough to dance with the fear, because it will never go away. And so I hope you all will dance with the fear. And so that's the presentation I had planned. If anyone has questions at this point, put them into the question box, and we can start chatting about the presentation or about anything else. What was my job? My job title was marketing manager. So the main company I worked with was a physical product business. And so we had those 3 product lines, which were cat furniture, valet parking equipment, and portable bars. And so I managed the online marketing. So we had individual websites for each of those, and we had marketing funnels and email marketing campaigns and pay-per-click campaigns and SEO strategies and all that. And so I was in charge of managing that, and had a small team and then some contractors that we did that with. Why New York over Austin? Well, I really like the cold. No, I think a big part of why I wanted to be in New York is, I mentioned kind of the community I've been in over the last 3 years, which was a really influential, impactful event for me to kind of get to be around all these entrepreneurs. And And I feel like I've really gotten to know that community, and it's been really great. And I'm now kind of trying to expand beyond it. And so New York's a cool place because there's just so many people doing so many things that it's really easy to kind of like get that serendipity of just bumping into random people. What is in your next book? So I'm actually working on, I think, I haven't told anyone this publicly. I'm working on a long form article that's going to be sort of the MVP for the next book, the minimum viable product. And the working title is The Entrepreneur Next Door. So kind of getting at some of the stuff I talked about in the End of Jobs, that I think when people think about entrepreneurship, that there's like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, like these are the guys people generally have come to mind. But there is this huge new section of the economy that are, you call them lifestyle businesses or freelancers or consultants or cash flow businesses. There's a lot of different terms of people who are running businesses that are very profitable, that are very successful, that aren't, making TechCrunch or doing anything like that. And so I'm really interested in that phenomenon. And I think also one of the things I really wanted to work on from the End of Jobs is, giving more actionable things to really equip people on the next step. And so that's a big part of it as well. So next question. So in college, they drilled in our heads, it takes about 10 years in business before you make money. In your experience, how does entrepreneurship compare? Great question. My general rule of thumb is 1,000 days, which is roughly 3 years, which is if you want to replace your traditional corporate income with entrepreneurial income that you do over the internet, that typically takes about 3 years. There's a good article called The 1,000-Day Rule. If you Google 1,000-Day Rule, it should pop up. They kind of give some more details about this, but that's generally what I see. I think it's either on the side or with savings for the first 6 months or a year, and then maybe you get to that point where the business is paying for itself, and then by 2 or 3 years in, it's not only paying for itself, but it's paying you often more than your corporate salary. What suggestions do you have for getting over fear of starting a company? I think I'm going to point back to this quote that I still left up on the screen. I think the first thing, I think one book that really influenced me on this was The War of Art by Steve Pressfield, which I would definitely encourage anyone to pick up. That the fear doesn't go away. I think starting from the perspective of when am I going to get over the fear and when is the fear going to go away, you kind of trapped yourself because it doesn't go away. I think you learn to recognize it for what it is, which is it's a feeling, it's an emotion, and it doesn't mean that that things aren't working right. You feel like you see the cheesecake and you feel like you want to eat it. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right thing. Those are feelings and emotions, and they're different from your actions. What will future webinars be on? Good question. If you have thoughts, things you'd like to hear me talk about, I can put together some other presentations. So if anyone has other things they'd like to hear about, please let me know. There is another book in the works, Greg. What are the best resources for overcoming entrepreneurial fear? So I'll go back to the answer I gave just a minute ago. I don't think the fear goes away. I think I'm going to again say The War of Art by Steve Pressfield. I think that's the book that really changed the way I think about that. Linchpin by Seth Godin as well. I think he does a really good job of addressing that. I want to start a subscription service that is a daily morning email that gives you a motivational quote, reminder to set your daily intention, and say a positive morning mantra. Do you think it will work? Yeah, I could totally see that working. Be interesting if you could do. It's hard to charge for just an email. I could see that being like that's your lead gen method, that you have a daily morning email, and that's what people subscribe to, and then maybe you sell them something off the back end. So it could be like, I could see like a journal, like a motivational journal, right, where it like every day has a quote and it like helps you plan your day. There was the 5-minute journal. If you look that up, they had a product similar like that did really, really well. The path to tackle entrepreneurship varies from region to region, especially in emergent countries. What is it that you have found to be common almost any place in the world to get started? I think probably the first thing I would say is, in terms of like business models, going back to Rob Walling's story, starting with simple business models. So one product, one-time sale, one primary marketing channel. And generally, the more expensive you can start, the easier it is. There's an article by Kevin Kelly called 1,000 True Fans, where he kind of lays out this math that if you can get 1,000 people to pay you $100 a year, which 1,000 people is not that many, and $100 a year doesn't seem like that much. You can make $100,000 a year because all of a sudden you can go direct to people over the internet. I think that's great. And actually, I want to talk about that more in my next book. But I think one common mistake is people start by trying to get 1,000 true fans when it's usually a lot easier to get to 10 true clients, which is, can you get 10 people that will pay you $10,000 a year? Is generally much, much easier than convincing 1,000 people to pay you $100 a year. Do you think many people are going the entrepreneurial route due to a heavy politically correct environment and big corporations? I don't know. I've never worked in a big corporation, so that's hard to say. I think, one of the people I interviewed for the book I'm working on now, I think there's certainly a real sense of frustration that, talking to someone, they're talking about working in a bank, and these just like internal political squabbles that weren't actually helping the underlying business. It wasn't good for the bank. I think people get really frustrated with that. I know, if I have to wake up so many days and work on just administrative stuff where I don't see any value creation, I find that really demoralizing. What motivates you? How do you keep yourself motivated to do your work? So broadly speaking, I think we live in a really amazing period of history. I think the internet, this cliche to say at this point, but the internet is the most transformative technology since the Industrial Revolution. And if you look at technologies, it usually takes about 100 years from the time they're commercialized to the time they play out. So if you say the internet was commercialized in 1995 with Netscape, we're like 20 years in. So we're in this real amazing sweet spot of arguably the most amazing technology that's ever existed. And I think that's just really cool to me. And getting to understand how that changes society and people and businesses is really cool. My practical suggestion is I do have a 25-year vision document, which I keep. If you look up antifragile planning on my site, I have a template you can download. And that's something I read every morning, thinking about what is on a bigger, longer term scale, what gets me emotionally excited. Top 5 books I've read in the past year. I had a post called 10 Influential Books that I read last year. I put up in January, so I would go there. I'm trying to remember what they were. Waking Up by Sam Harris was great. Status Anxiety by Elaine de Botton, I thought was really good. I can't remember the rest of them. You'll have to go look at the post. Yes, so whoever posted the tropicalmba.com/living the dream, that's the 1,000-day rule I was talking about. Have you had any business failures so far? And if so, have they ended up turning into positive outcomes? I have. I'm actually going to put up an article next week about one. I started a site project 2 years ago on concierge medicine, talking about if you're not in the U.S., it's a very long explanation to how the U.S. healthcare system works, but suffice to say it's very, very convoluted. And then there's kind of a movement now to shift away from people using insurance to pay for healthcare to people paying their physicians directly, right? So like the way car insurance works is you have car insurance for catastrophes, but you don't use your car insurance to pay for your gas, and you don't use your car insurance to pay for new windshield wipers. But that's how health insurance works in America, and that's very, very inefficient. So I started a project there. I was trying to do a marketing agency to help doctors that were moving into this new model market their practices effectively. I went to about 2 conferences. I interviewed a lot of people. I had a few clients, and it never went anywhere. And I'm going to write about next week what sort of my lessons learned there. I think the biggest thing was it really forced me, or really got me to understand what my personal strengths are. And I think that's, we talk about what's the best business model or what business should I start. And that's really a very subjective question, that your personal strengths, your personal proclivities, what you're interested in, have a real influence in the success of a business. If you hate sales and you hate getting on sales calls with people and you start a business which is dependent on sales, like the business will not work. And likewise for whatever else, that enjoying the day-to-day of the business, I think, is really important. Where do you find inspiration for your newsletter blog topics? A lot of it's from books I read, but what I actually do is I use Evernote, and I keep 3 notebooks. One is stories, one is ideas, and one is metaphors. So if I have a really good story, I'll put it down. If I have a really good idea, I'll put it down. If I have a really good metaphor, I put it down. And usually my better blog topics, my newsletters, are when all 3 of those come together, that I find a story that matches up with a metaphor, that matches up with an idea, and I can put that into one post. Let's see, what else do we have? What's the name of the guy with the cognitive enhancement blog? His name is Jesse Lawler, and it's a podcast, actually. It's called Smart Drug Smarts. About a third of it is about like nootropics and quote unquote smart drugs. And then he also talks a lot about just like other forms of cognitive enhancement, exercise, food, that kind of stuff. It's really fascinating. He's like an Oxford researcher. He's got some amazing guests. Essential tools you recommend, like Google Drive, etc. Google Drive. Actually, I have a full list. If you go to taylorpearson.me/toolkit, one word, no spaces, no hyphens. I have a full list of all the stuff I personally use and recommend. Batman or Superman? Batman, for sure. I can't understand why entrepreneurs don't take advantage of sites like Quora, Medium, and Twitter. Do you have any websites that are helpful? I like Quora, Medium, and Twitter. Maybe see if you have any specifics in terms of what types of website. That's very I like lots of websites. Let's see. How did you grow your fan base? So I started really investing in my site around the end of 2014. At that time, I had been writing on the side when I had a job and when I was working on other projects for about 2 years. So I had about, I published, I would say, twice a month on average, sometimes more frequently, sometimes less frequently. But I had a couple hundred people at that point. So the first maybe 2 or 3 years for me was a kind of side project and got up to a few hundred people. And then I started kind of growing it in earnest towards the end of 2014. The biggest thing, to be honest, for me was writing the book. That there is a real differentiator between blogger and author in terms of just how people perceive you. And that I had a lot of opportunities open up once the book came out. It's hard to ask someone to have you on their podcast to talk about your most recent blog post. It's not notable. But a book is a bit more notable. So podcasts for the book were a big part of that. The book had an email opt-in, which drove people back to my site. That was a big part of it. And then I distributed the book on a lot of different platforms, iTunes, Amazon, and all of those people came back. And so that's the main stuff I've done. I've also done some content syndication, so taking articles I write and copying them to other places like medium.com, Quora, and then working on doing that on other kind of major media sites. What's the best way to find a great business idea? Yeah, I haven't been asked this question in a long time. I generally think ideas are overrated. There's a bit of a business idea paradox that people that are in business have so many ideas they can't stay focused on one. People that want to get in business can't think of any ideas. So most of my best ideas, to be honest, are ideas I took from people that were further along than me that just didn't have the time to do them. So actually, my book was not my idea. I was at a conference and someone else said they'd been thinking about writing it, and they just didn't have time. They had other business obligations that they said these are higher value opportunities than the book, and so they said, yeah, this is the book, this is the market opportunity. I understand the market. And so I said, that's great. And I just executed on the idea of someone that had a better purview of the market. So I think probably the best way to get a business idea is to go work with someone that has business ideas in some capacity. How did the hire go? I'm still in the interview process, but it's going well so far. Thank you. Can you get a copy of the presentation? Yes, I will. I'm recording this, so I will post a copy of this on the site, and you're free to do with it what you like. The toolkit site, again, it's taylorpearson.me/toolkit. And actually, if you go to just the homepage of my site and sign up for the email list, it'll send you an email, and that email will contain a link to the toolkit. What does your morning routine look like? Do you have a specific amount of time each day for writing? So I'm a pretty early morning person, and that's not like I think some people moralize being an early morning person. It's not particularly hard for me to get up in the morning. That's kind of my natural rhythm. So I usually wake up between 6 and 7. I read for an hour. I do a little bit of yoga or stretching just to move. I meditate for 20 minutes. I use an app called Headspace, which I've been using for a couple of years. I really like just because it has a lot of kind of gamification built in that keeps me coming back and doing it consistently. And then I sit down, usually work from home. I do a thing called the 5-minute journal. If you Google 5-minute journal, you can find the free templates, but basically list 3 things you're grateful for, your 3 biggest priorities for the day, and then 3 personal affirmations. So I'll do that, and then I will read over the document I mentioned I have in my Evernote, which is like a 25-year long-term vision, because I want to be able to connect the activities I'm working on that day to that vision. That I see that this is part of something going. This is something going towards a bigger goal. And then, I do block out usually the first 2 hours of my morning, at least for writing. And I usually write 6 days a week. I don't write on Sundays, but I usually write Monday through Saturday. I have an Instagram page that has 50,000 followers and a Facebook page with 10,000 followers. That's awesome. I have a few business concepts that I'd like to try out. How can I turn those fans into customers, and what to avoid? The first thing I would do, I think it's very difficult to sell over social media from what I've seen. I would see how you could convert those people to email subscribers. If there's something you can post on Instagram or post on Facebook, it's often called like a lead magnet or like an opt-in bait, which isn't a great word, but something where you can convert those people to email subscribers, and then start selling over email, and sell to small segments of those. So let's say you have 50,000 on Instagram and 10,000 on Facebook. If you convert 1,000 of those to email, you can segment them out into say 50 or 100 customer segments, and then just start testing different product ideas. So that's something I've done in the past. Like if you have a bigger email list, pick a section of that email list. And then I usually shoot for a 10% conversion rate. So if I have 50 people and I send them, I say, here's this product. If 5 of them out of 50 convert, that's market validation in my mind. And you have to change. If it's a $5,000 product, that number is going to be lower. Maybe it's 1% or less than 1%. If it's a $5 product, the number should probably be higher. So it's probably like for a product in the hundreds of dollars. Did you self-publish? I did self-publish through Amazon and CreateSpace. Is Trump antifragile? I'm not sure what Trump is. I'm not going to weigh in on politics. He's something. Some people recommend quitting your job to start an entrepreneurial venture. Others recommend starting your venture on the side while staying at your job. Ultimately, do you think one path is better than the other? That's a really good question. I don't think one path is absolutely better than the other. What I can say from experience is in either case, I think it's really important, or it's really smart to, what I say is build bridges. So whether you leave your job or you're doing something on the side, to give yourself a psychological kind of sense that this is always something you can go back to. I think, always to leave on good terms or to do side projects on good terms. So I would say that in either case. I think a lot of it depends on if there's any kind of overlap. I think really the best strategy in my mind is if you can find a job which actually leads towards what you want to do. That if you can find a way to align your income and kind of your entrepreneurial pursuits, whether that's working for a startup or one of these fast growth small businesses, that's that's what I did. That I basically got paid for 2 years to learn marketing and technology, and then was able to take that and get my business moving pretty quickly with some things that I'd been doing on the side. I will say it can be difficult to do on the side for a long period of time. There are people that it's hard to stick at it, I think, for years sometimes. So those are kind of my raw thoughts. I hope that's helpful. What are your thoughts about using a digital magazine as an authority tool in addition to having a book? Clarify what you mean by digital magazine. I'm not sure I know exactly what that is. These are talking about like you can buy it on like iTunes for like $5. You subscribe for like $5 a month or $10 a month or whatever it is. I think if that's what you're talking about, I think that's cool. Actually, I've really been excited. There's a guy named Ben Thompson who runs a site called Stratechery. It's like tech commentary. He talks about Apple and Google and Netflix and how the internet is changing things on kind of the macro scale. But the cool thing he doesn't talk about as much is his business is actually he has 1,000. He's literally this Kevin Kelly model. He has 1,000. I think at this point 2,000 people who pay him $10 a month, and he sends out 2 or 3 emails a week with his thoughts on technology. And I think that's a very good authority building tool. He's also really smart, which helps a lot. Like he obviously knows what he's talking about. I do think there is something ephemeral about books that I don't think is true of a magazine. You know, like there's something about the word author, for good or for bad, that denotes a lot, carries a lot of gravitas, that has a lot of authority. So I think if I was choosing between digital magazine and book, and my goal was authority, I would definitely choose book. Thoughts on Apple's stance against the FBI, and how can this affect entrepreneurship? I can't say I've thought super deeply about it. My gut sense is that they made the right move, and good on them. I think there's actually a good book called The Master Switch by Tim Wu. And one of the things he talks about is with any kind of communication medium, which radio, television, the internet, the incentives to get control of it once it gets big, the incentives for for TV to come under control, for radio to come under control, for movies to come under control, were so huge that corporations ended up finding ways to basically take control of the medium that used to be open source. The radio started as a very, very, if you look at the guys in the early days of radio and the way they talk about radio, it's very much the way people talk about the internet now. That it's this amazing new platform that's going to democratize the way information is shared and all this. And obviously that's not how it turned out, that corporations and governments came in and put up regulations and increased the barriers to entry. So I think keeping the internet a very low barrier to entry place is very important. Thoughts on the book Sapiens? I thought it was terrific. That was one of my favorite books last year. By far. I love, I've heard people call the genre big history. So for anyone that's not familiar, Sapiens, it's basically the book is, what would it look like if an alien wrote a history of the Homo sapiens species? So his contention is that all previous histories of Homo sapiens have been narcissistic because they've been written by other Homo sapiens. So what would it look like to take a really irreverent view of the history of Homo sapiens? And then he goes on and says a lot of very interesting, very irreverent things. I thought that book was terrific. Cool. So let's see. I think that is it, guys. I got 9 o'clock here, which is when we were scheduled to finish, and I'm out of questions. So I will let everyone go. Thank you all for coming and hanging out. If you're interested in the book, I'll post this presentation. You can also get the book on Amazon or eojbook.com's site, a page I have set up. You can download the three best chapters and check it out. So thank you all very much. Have a good evening, morning, wherever you are.